It's recording.
Oh.
Yeah. All right, we're recording.
Hey, hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Hey. Welcome, and thank you, Annalisa and North Burial Ground for hosting me. So, my name's Kurt Deion, and I live in Cranston, and a lot of the people in here know me and know that, but just putting that on the record. And so I've been visiting grave sites since I was 8 years old, back in summer of 2003. Really started with the U.S. presidents and first ladies, then vice presidents, and progressed over time. And you'll see a lot of those different graves today. And I'll be going over a bit. And I also have a website that I disseminate a lot of the historical information on and share a lot of the pictures. And I focus on grave hunting and hands-on history. So visiting the graves, but also, if possible, visiting different historic sites where things happened. So could have been a civil rights march, could have been a presidential assassination site, anything really. So my goal is to inspire people to visit, if they exist, the graves or historic sites of whatever interests them in history. For me, it started out as the presidents, but it doesn't have to be for everybody. So I just wanted to encourage people to follow their own interests with that. So I've been doing this since I was 8 years old. I have a history bachelor's from Bryant University, and I have a history master's from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and I specialized in public history there. So I guess I can get started with the presentation. So it's going to go a little bit back and forth between a PowerPoint and my website. So I'm just going to start off with the PowerPoint first a second. I'm going to need to share my screen, realizing. So, okay, so I should be seeing my screen. And from the beginning. Okay, so once again, this presentation is Grave Hunting and Hands-on History, and hosted by North Burial Ground in Providence, Rhode Island. Excellent cemetery to go visit. And just want to start off again. So I've mentioned all that stuff already, so I can skip ahead, but there it is in writing. And what is public history? So Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, on a very different subject, said that he couldn't really describe it, but he knew it when he saw it. And that's what, on their own website, the National Council of Public History quotes and references. But they also have this quote: "Although public historians can sometimes be teachers, public history is usually defined as history beyond the walls of the traditional classroom." So could be a tour guide, could be an exhibit curator or a museum technician. There's, again, even the National Council of Public History says there isn't really a great definition. But that's what we go with overall. History outside of a classroom academic setting. So if you're into graves, you might know of the database findagrave.com. It was created in the 1990s. It's now owned by Ancestry, which entails a lot of genealogy records and database info. So there's a category on findagrave.com for if you're famous. So it can be, of course, subjective, but of their about 200 million burial records that they have, many of them could be your relatives, and users can add them. Could be your friends, or they might be famous individuals. And so of the ones that are listed as famous on Find a Grave, I have currently visited, since starting with John Adams, Abigail Adams, John Quincy, and Louisa Catherine Adams would have been my very first ones when I was 8 years old. So Since then till now, I have visited 1,298 famous graves per findagrave.com. That includes all 39 deceased U.S. presidents, the 42 deceased vice presidents that have grave sites. Walter Mondale passed away last year, and he was cremated, but his ashes have not yet been interred at Lakewood Cemetery in Minneapolis. That was announced back in May that is the intention, but we don't have word on when that will be. There are 49 deceased speakers of the U.S. House of Representatives. I've visited 20, and I've seen 56 out of 103 Supreme Court justices. Then just a few more categories. 29 of the 89 deceased presidents pro tem of the U.S. Senate, 38 out of the 56 Declaration of Independence signers, 65 out of the 265 dead members of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, Cooperstown, and probably my craziest ambition at this point, I've seen 139 out of roughly at least 470 presidential cabinet members. I've also seen Three Stooges, but there are also 6 Three Stooges, so it just gets too complicated to go any farther with that. So I left them out, other than this anecdote. But so my website, I started it in 2009 when I was age 14. There was a kind of a big hiccup last year that I'm not going to get into. People who know me rather well know what happened with that. But basically, I had to start my website from scratch. So I hired a friend from college, Marta Gravier, who's an absolutely outstanding website designer, and she got me started by designing 4 pages of my new website 2.0, and I'm working most days on chipping away at that. But I thought, why don't I go and show you a bit what this new version of my website is looking like. Again, as photographs, I am working on the biographical info. That's the place that's the sparsest right now. And I do have GPS coordinates for about 99% of the graves that I've visited. So click on the website there, and welcome to Kurt's Historic Site. So that's the slogan, grave hunting and hands-on history. And you may recognize this vantage point is from the Lee Custis Mansion at Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. Right at the bottom, right here is the gravesite of John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy and 2 of their young children, and the memorial bridge going over to Washington, D.C., the Lincoln Memorial, the Nancy Hanks building, which is the post office building, the Washington Monument, the U.S. Capitol, and the Jefferson building of the Library of Congress. So I just really like that picture they took. So on this website, again, a lot of graves and various information about the people whose graves I've visited. That is me at age 9 with Theodore Roosevelt and Edith Roosevelt, the President and First Lady. I will also have, and this part is really under construction right now because I've been focusing on the graves, but photographs and information about different museums, historic sites, attractions. And this is actually on display at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. That is the Rosa Parks bus that she was on December 1st, 1955, when she engaged in that civil disobedience or civil rights. And then I have other things such as my interview with Jim Lavelle, Pearl Harbor survivor and detective handcuffed to accused presidential assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. So that is something that you can find on there if you like. It's about a 55-minute interview. So getting into more of the graves, which I promise we will, so can look at graves of different categories. I also have if you scroll down below, you can sort alphabetically and also by state. But I just wanted to start off with a couple presidents and first ladies on here before we head back to the PowerPoint. So for an example, the most complete page I have right now is George Washington. So I have captions about that and for the different photos. So this is the original tomb of George and Martha Washington and their various relatives at Mount Vernon. This was falling apart even when George Washington was still alive, and he stipulated in his last will and testament that a new, grander vault should be built for his family. And it took about 30 years after he died, but they did it. And in spring of 1831, the Washingtons were moved into this tomb a short distance away. And this is so you can click on the pictures, and unless I made a mistake at any point and didn't switch on that you can click to enlarge it, you should be able to click on all the different pictures and view them just grander scale. So this is the sarcophagus of George Washington here, first president, commanding general of the Continental Army, and the first lady, Martha Washington. There were about a couple dozen Washington relatives that are interred in the back chamber out of view in the tomb, which is accessed through that door here. That includes Supreme Court Justice Bushrod Washington, who was a nephew. And this tomb has a lot of interesting history. There's a whole book about it that was really fascinating, released about 3 years ago by Matthew R. Costello, who was a historian at the White House Historical Association. And it's called The Property of the Nation. It goes all into the history of preserving Mount Vernon after George Washington's death, the tomb, and what his image and the tomb and the slave plantation of Mount Vernon have meant to different groups of people. Very fascinating, and highly recommend that book for all the different aspects. So George Washington was my fourth U.S. president, but this was the first president whose grave I had my picture taken at. I had to go back another time to get my pictures at my first three, which were John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and John F. Kennedy, as well as the First Ladies, Abigail, Louisa, and Jacqueline. So we'd continue down again. So this is kind of the template for what I would like all the different pages to be at some point, having different facts about where they died, cause of death, kind of what their claim to fame is. If you click this will bring you a link to Martha Washington's page. His vice president was John Adams. And I also want it, so if there is a site where they're buried that has a website, I want to lead you to that, because sometimes the cost of admission might change if there is, or the time or hours. So I have links to those as well, or on pages that don't have them yet will. And then I have GPS coordinates. So I want to help people find the graves. And sometimes, as great as it is, the website Find a Grave, the GPS coordinates can shift sometimes. So I have it so that it's pretty much locked in. Well, not pretty much locked in. It is locked in on my website, so that will not change. And sometimes I'm literally looking in aerial view and counting the headstones to make sure I'm putting it on the exact one to help people as much as possible. So, and then lastly, I'll show that. So then this is the biggest section that was going to take me the longest amount of time with everybody, is the historical background. So using primary sources, secondary sources, and I then throw in different hands-on history site. So I took this last year in Annapolis, Maryland. This is the room where George Washington resigned his commission from the Continental Army in 1783, and just things like that. So it goes on, and then of course at the bottom, very important, sources consulted. So then I have links to different articles that I used reference for. I have the citations for books. So I always want to encourage people to go learning in different ways, the hands-on history sense, if they can, the reading and academic avenues. I encourage them all. So I think now would be a good time for me to switch over to the PowerPoint and show you some of the bigger variety of graves that I've visited and that you could visit. And maybe this will, again, just inspire you to visit other graves that I don't have yet or weren't on my radar at all. So I mentioned we have the Rosa Parks bus here. So this was on Montgomery, Alabama, as a General Motors bus. And so this was an incredible moment. This was back in 2010. I don't know in this pandemic, I don't want to necessarily call it post-pandemic world, but in this pandemic world, if you can go on the bus, but at least back in 2010, they allowed visitors to sit in Rosa Parks' seat on the bus at the museum where it's kept, which is the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, as I said earlier. And so my father and I were on this trip back in April 2010, and we went from sitting on Rosa Parks' seat in Dearborn to taking a lunch break to go see her grave in Detroit nearby. So she passed away in 2005 and was interred there with her husband, Raymond A. Parks, who died in 1977. They lived in Michigan. They moved there after the Montgomery bus boycott. And Rosa Parks rests there with there are numerous other people of note there that I'll have to go back and see. Since I visited with my father in 2010, singer Aretha Franklin was laid to rest at this same Detroit cemetery. And also another grave that I did not get the first time I was there was Levi Stubbs of the musical group The Four Tops is there. So it's nice epitaph for Mrs. Parks. Says beneath her name and her lifespan, mother of the modern day civil rights movement. So another hands-on history site that relates to civil rights is the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And this is where peaceful protesters, demonstrators, marchers were in March 1965. Beginning a march to advocate for the Voting Rights Act that ended up being passed that year, in large part due to them bringing awareness and their activism. People such as John Lewis were on the first attempt to cross this bridge, were beaten by law enforcement, and so this is a very powerful site, and I'm a big fan of former Congressman John Lewis. And back in March, I was able to visit his gravesite in Atlanta, Georgia. So he's buried there next to his wife. That is her headstone there. It's been now 2 years since he passed, but he still does not have a headstone as of yet. But the epitaph says, "They walked where others had not gone." Now, this was a personal touch. If I can do a personal tribute, I like to do so. So quickly, back in 2015, I was living in DC and interning at the White House. Sorry, not at the White House Historical Association, rather the U.S. Capitol Historical Society. And every summer they have a dinner that honors a congressional committee. That year, it was the House Ways and Means Committee, and I was there working, and I had a name tag. Congressman John Lewis was RSVP'd to appear. For whatever reason, he was unable to make it. And as a souvenir at the end of the night, I asked some of my U.S. Capitol Historical Society colleagues if I could take John Lewis's unused name tag as a souvenir. So I then united him with the name tag there and wore mine that I was wearing that night when I had hoped to meet him in person. That's another thing for me with visiting these graves is often I didn't have a chance to meet certain historical figures, but if they have a grave in the physical sense, that's a way to be where they are, I guess. And in the sense of visiting historic sites where they lived or where events occurred, that's meeting them in a different sense or being in their footsteps. Those who did actions good, actions bad, actions ugly. And then concluding this civil rights portion, another gravesite I was able to visit this past March, Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King interred at the King Center in Atlanta. So this is a sarcophagus that it was only made about 16 or so years ago when Coretta Scott King died. Martin Luther King has rested in numerous sarcophagi or stone coffin containers over the years. They have quotes on this front of their sarcophagi. Martin Luther King's quoting the end of his "I Have a Dream" speech from 1963, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Or rather, paraphrasing it, a word or so was changed. And then Mrs. King's epitaph is a Bible verse, as is something that combines those two things on this pool that has justice rolling down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream going over to the sarcophagi. So this falling water pool, that quote is from the middle of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech and is also from a Bible verse from the book of Amos. So of course, remember that Martin Luther King was a reverend at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which is right nearby the King Center here, and also near his birthplace. So ties in quite nicely location-wise. Now to a very different person. Not everybody that I visited has had their entire body buried at the gravesite. This is the grave of the skull of one of the Lincoln assassination conspirators, Lewis Thornton Powell, aka Lewis Payne. He was just 20 years old on April 14th, 1865, when he attacked Secretary of State William Seward in his bed in Washington, D.C. He attacked numerous other people that were in the Seward household that night. Meanwhile, John Wilkes Booth, the actor, was assassinating President Abraham Lincoln a few blocks away at Ford's Theater, and George Atzerodt was, instead of assassinating Vice President Andrew Johnson, as he had been tasked with, he was drinking in the hotel bar. He chickened out. But Seward survived. The only person who died that night was Abraham Lincoln, passing away actually 7:22 the following morning. But Powell, along with Mary Surratt, David Herold, and George Atzerodt, they were all executed on July 7th, 1865 at what is Fort McNair in Washington, D.C. The bodies of the executed conspirators were buried near the gallows. They got moved a few different times, and Powell's skull went missing until the 1990s when the Smithsonian Institution was going through its collection of Native American skulls. Indigenous tribes had requested repatriation, wanted to claim back the remains of their ancestors from the Smithsonian, and Smithsonian employees were going through the skulls that they had, and this one was labeled that it was the skull of Payne, who stabbed and attacked Secretary of State William Seward. They then noticed that the jaw of this skull was broken, and that matched the story of Lewis Powell, or Payne, had been kicked in the face by a mule when he was a child and had his jaw broken. So everything added up that this was indeed the long lost skull of one of the Lincoln assassination conspirators, and they buried his skull in Geneva, Florida, next to his mother in 1994. And this is the marker that is there at the grave of his skull. Again, switching gears rather abruptly, but I was trying to show a variety of the graves that are out there. This is one of the McDonald brothers, Richard or Dick McDonald. He's interred in Manchester, New Hampshire. And so you can see there, he's in a cremation niche, and lots of everyday people just interred in that niche, just as he is with his wife, except he has the golden arches, he and his wife Dorothy there. And it's tough to see with the reflection of the glass, but it says founder of McDonald's. So I thought that this was a very unique and interesting urn. And his brother, Maurice, other co-founder of McDonald's, is buried out in California, as is Ray Kroc, the businessman who really made McDonald's take off and become the gigantic company that we've known it as. This is an animal grave I wanted to throw in here, and a Hollywood one. So Slats the lion. So he was MGM's mascot, aka Leo the lion, from 1924 to 1928. Slats was the very first MGM lion that you see in the MGM logo at the beginning of their films. And that very first film that he appeared in was a 1924 movie, He Who Gets Slapped, starring Lon Chaney. It is a bizarre film where Lon Chaney is a clown whose name is He, and yes, he gets slapped. But so Slats the lion then retired, and then he died in the 1930s, and his handler buried him on the grounds of the farm that he lived at in Gillette, New Jersey. So my friends and I, in April, were driving down this road here, and we just parked alongside and went to go take a picture of the grave of Slats the lion. And here's a cameo from my friend Rebecca, who I believe is in this chat, this Teams meeting right now. And so this is the grave of Slats the lion. So just a roadside grave site here with the lion statue. Doesn't say his name on it. So if you haven't done the advanced research, you might not know what this lion statue next to an old farm by the side of the road in New Jersey indicates, but that it's the original MGM Lion's grave. This is a little bit closer one to those of us in Rhode Island. You may not know that the smiley face was designed by somebody up in Worcester, Harvey Ball, and He passed away in 2001, and both sides of his grave, I think, very nicely have the smiley face on it. So, just an indicator of what he did. And I always like that when there's the personal touch of this is what the person did. And it doesn't even say on this, oh, he designed the smiley face, but just at least a little nod or indicator, I think, is a very nice touch, and I always appreciate when that is something that exists at gravesites. Then sticking with the Ball theme, a very different Ball, we have Lucille Ball, actress, producer, comedian, of course known for I Love Lucy. You may not know that she actually was very important as a producer in greenlighting Star Trek, the original Star Trek series back in the 1960s. When she died in the 1980s, she was cremated and her ashes were originally interred in California. They were subsequently moved to the town of her birth, Jamestown, New York. So really Western New York there. And the town has really embraced Lucy because they love Lucy. And there's a bunch of murals throughout town. There's multiple statues of her. There's even multiple museums next door dedicated to her, her life, her career, Desilu Studios that she had with her husband, Desi Arnaz. And there's recreated sets from the I Love Lucy show. There's original props, scripts, belongings, personal belongings, automobiles, and it's a very nice Lucy experience there. If you're an I Love Lucy fan, you absolutely have to go to Jamestown. And you'll notice that as you go up the little pathway there is a stone heart for, of course, reminiscent of the I Love Lucy logo. And then on the actual gravestone itself, there is another heart and in that nice script with her last name. Another Hollywood celebrity, we have Jackie Gleason here. He's got quite the tomb in Miami, Florida. Jackie Gleason, actor, writer, musician, whole lots of things. Know him from the show The Honeymooners. Also, he was in the films The Hustler and Smokey and the Bandit. So he has this really grand tomb by this little lake there within the cemetery. And so he's there with his wife. These sarcophagi lids, quite elaborate. And I also wanted to point out. I know it's a bit small here, but one of his catchphrases and also a song that he sang was titled "And Away We Go," and so that's a nice touch there for the great one having his catchphrase on the grave. Again, the sarcophagi. Now, here's another really interesting one that I think a lot of people are fans of is the Harry Houdini grave. Harry Houdini, illusionist and escape artist, and he's interred in Queens in New York City. This is a grave that has very interesting history because you'll notice that there's a bust of Houdini up there, and often that bust will get stolen. So I was going there 6 years ago with my father, my friend Kelvis, and we weren't sure if the bust was going to be there or not. Luckily, it was, so it's had to be replaced many times over the years. Houdini's got a cult following, and it's probably also not helped by the fact that Houdini died on Halloween, so you get that extra spooky factor. So this is his grave, and his wife Bess is actually not buried with Harry Houdini. So Harry was Jewish, Bess was not, and she is interred a few towns up north in Hawthorne, New York. So, but this is me and my friend Kelvis there with Harry. And this statue in mourning. And you can see here some of the tributes that people have left. This right here at the very bottom, that's a coin that I left. People left flowers and even alcohol bottle there. Another Hollywood figure, we have R. Lee Ermey. So you may know him from the movie Full Metal Jacket. You may know him from being Sarge in Toy Story. So he's interred at Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. And he's in the way far back. This was the farthest back I had ever gone into the cemetery. This was last November. And you can see he passed away a little over 4 years ago in 2018. His stone, I like that it references his nickname, the Gunny. And I brought a personal tribute for him, being 1 year old when, or 1 year old when the movie Toy Story came out in 1995. Has always been a big part of my life. So I brought my little Sarge, Green Army man there for photos. I did take that back home with me, though, so that's in my room. So sometimes there's gifts that I might leave at a grave, and sometimes I just bring it for the photo op and to be able to say that it was there and bring it back. Another Arlington National Cemetery person that I was able to visit last year was Associate Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's there in Section 5, not too far from the Kennedy gravesite, and she's interred there with her husband, Martin. And Section 5 is an area where a great many Supreme Court justices are buried. William Rehnquist is off over here, out of view. Oliver Wendell Holmes, William O. Douglas is back there. This grave right here is actually Chief Justice Warren Burger. Then you have Potter Stewart, Thurgood Marshall is out of view over here. So this is a place where in modern day a lot of Supreme Court justices are buried in this very section. There are some other Supreme Court justices buried elsewhere in the cemetery, William Howard Taft, Arthur Goldberg, and Earl Warren. But most of them are right here in this section. Hugo Black is there as well in a different section. So it was a nice visit to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we had gotten some roses from an event that was held that day in November for the 100th anniversary of the Tomb of the Unknowns. They were distributing flowers for people to lay on the plaza of the tomb. That's something that hadn't been allowed in many, many, many decades. So we traveled down there from Rhode Island. That's me and Kelvis again, 5 years later. And they gave us some extra flowers, so I laid one at the grave of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Kelvis laid his spare at Jacqueline Kennedy's grave. Sticking with the Ruth theme, we have Babe Ruth here. I promised a few athletes, so he's buried in Hawthorne, New York, in the same cemetery that I referenced a few minutes ago, that Bess Houdini is buried in. So Babe Ruth, George Herman Ruth, was raised Catholic. That faith was very important to him. In fact, it was in addition to just how to behave and his faith, brother Matthias down there in Baltimore at the school he was attending actually taught Babe Ruth how to play baseball. So brother Matthias, who is actually buried up in Massachusetts, very instrumental in Babe Ruth's life from a spiritual sense, a behavioral sense, and a sports sense. So Babe Ruth, of course, perhaps the most famous baseball player, and had the crown of home run king from 1921 until Hank Aaron broke it in 1974. Now, Babe Ruth, I have to say, is the grave where I've seen the most tokens or grave goods or tributes left to anybody. I've gone there multiple times, and it's always overflowing with gloves, hats, photos, flowers, coins, you name it. A lot of graves, sometime depending on the cemetery's rules, they might clear those away overall, but Babe Ruth's is always overloaded with tributes, more so than any grave I've ever seen. So this is a more recent grave, the second athlete on here. And this is somebody who has not actually been deceased even a year. So I wasn't entirely sure if I was going to include this, but I decided to. It was Jerry Remy. So a Red Sox player and NESN broadcaster. He was the Red Sox second baseman for about 7 seasons, and many years as the color commentator on Red Sox television broadcasts with play-by-play announcers such as Don Orsillo and Dave O'Brien, and he battled cancer many times. Last October, he did end up passing away from cancer, and he's buried in Weston, Massachusetts, just a few plots over, actually, from another member of the Boston Red Sox Hall of Fame, Lou Gorman. And then there's another Red Sox Hall of Famer, Eddie Collins, who is buried elsewhere in the cemetery. And Eddie Collins is also a National Baseball Hall of Famer. And Remy was an interesting grave for me to visit. There's not many people I can say this about at this point, but he's one of the people whose graves I've visited, and I'm talking celebrities, not family members or friends, but one of the people whose graves I've visited that I actually met in person. So this was in July of 2019, just a couple years before he passed away. So he was in a remission at this time. This was at a Barnes & Noble bookstore in Massachusetts. So, and then as a tribute and tie-in, I was wearing the same Fear the Beards 2013 Red Sox shirt and hat that I wore when I met him when I visited his grave this past February. Now, to finish up, as far as the graves are concerned, I have a few Rhode Islanders for you. So Merrill Hasenfeld was the vice chairman and CEO of Hasbro for a great number of years, and he was in charge when a lot of their most iconic toys came out. G.I. Joe, Mr. Potato Head, and he's interred in Warwick, Rhode Island. And I brought my Mr. Potato Head when I visited him with my father last December. And my father brought this old Hasbro box, the Color View pencil craft. Hasbro started out before toys was actually selling pencil boxes. So Rhode Island history there. Some more Rhode Island history. You may not know the name of Gaetano Gravino, but you might have eaten his doughboys or chowder or clam cakes. So he and his wife, Sally, who's still alive, they founded Iggy's down there in Warwick. So this was from April. I went with my father. We went down to Iggy's, got some doughboys, drove up to his grave at St. Basil the Great Cemetery in Cumberland, tracked down his grave because there wasn't any GPS, so we were just strolling around till we found it. And I was wearing an I Survived the Line at Iggy's shirt. If you've been to Iggy's, you know that line can get very long there in the summer. And thought that this was a nice tribute. And I put a video with some narration on my Instagram account, and I tagged Iggy's, and I believe Gaetano's son runs the account, and he is now the owner of Iggy's, and he was, I believe it was him, but at least the account was very grateful for the tribute, and they said that they miss him. All this time later. He passed away in 1994. But so I thought that was nice that it was kind of a an approval of what I had done in this tribute. Two more. We have Ciceretta Jones here. She was, at the time, she was called the greatest singer of her race and known as Black Patty. This was comparing her to an Italian opera singer of the time. But that nickname, again, is trying to compare her to somebody when she could have been and should have been known just as her own singer. She was very, very talented and internationally known as a soprano. She sang for 4 presidents. She was one of the first Black women to perform at Carnegie Hall. And her grave was unmarked from when she was buried in 1933 until 2018. So she died impoverished. And it took fundraising and organization to get this grave marker placed for her and her mother, who is listed on the back of it, 4 years ago. So that goes to demonstrate that depending on people's gender or their race or their economic status, they might not always get the gravestone or the burial that other people do. But luckily, Ciceretta Jones is a famous Rhode Islander, buried at Grace Church Cemetery in Providence, now has a gravestone. And then lastly, it wouldn't be very nice of me to not include a grave of somebody buried at North Burial Ground, and which is hosting me tonight. And I wanted to make it one that people don't usually talk about. So not Horace Mann, educator, who actually his obelisk is over here, or one of the governors or Declaration of Independence signer Stephen Hopkins, but I went with Christopher Olney, militia colonel, grist mill owner, and namesake of the Oneyville section of Providence. So he owned the 95 acres that now makes up that Oneyville section, and home, of course, to one of my favorite restaurants, Oneyville New York System, for those hot wieners or gaggers, whatever you want to call them. So the Find a Grave Memorial said that people weren't really sure which one was actually Christopher Olney's actual grave marker, but my father and I went to the plot. We're trying to decipher the very faded inscriptions, and he got a bottle of water and he poured a little bit on the flat marker there. Was able to discern that it did say Christopher, and he said earlier today that this was one of the greatest moments of his life. So he's maybe a little too obsessed with the Oneyville section of Providence, but it's a place with a lot of history and character, and this is the person who it's named after. So he was very happy about finding Christopher Olney. So there's a whole lot of people that you aren't really aware of that have very interesting graves or very interesting history, across the world, across the country, across Rhode Island, and even in individual cemeteries like North Burial Ground. So reflections quickly. I think that these graves can show in certain instances how someone wanted to be remembered. In other instances, maybe people didn't have the opportunity or the financial means, the circumstances to decide how they were going to be buried or remembered, but somebody else decided for them, be it a family member or somebody decades later. And also, thirdly, the certainty of death is equal, but death itself but is not the great equalizer in its totality. So again, people, die in different ways. They might have different amount of money, different access to healthcare, might be remembered differently. So that's a common phrase again, that death is the great equalizer, but only that one aspect of it truly is. So, and I think, of course we could go on forever about this, but I think that's something that is worth noting and changing the perception of that phrase. And I just want to say thank you for hosting me and for tuning in. And that is my contact information there for my website. Again, it's a work in progress, building version 2.0 back up, but more is going on there all the time. That is my email address. And I'm on Instagram at KD Gravehunter. And I do have a manuscript for a book that I've written, and I've been working quite diligently at trying to find a literary agent or a publisher for this history travel memoir. If anybody has any connections, they can really connect me with an agent or a publisher. I would greatly appreciate it. So everybody that's read it has loved it. So maybe it's just because they know me, but no, but they've said that totally divorced from that. They think it's a good book. So I'm hoping to get it out to a wider audience of people, and yourselves included. So thank you for anything you can help with that. And thank you for giving me your attention. And I'll switch this back and see if anybody has any questions.
All right, Kurt, that was awesome. I can't believe how many places you've been, and also how cool Harry Houdini's grave is. Like, that one was probably my favorite. Don't tell Christopher only. I feel like I should have a little more loyalty, but that Houdini grave was pretty great. So I actually have a question, and then I'll let other people ask questions if they have them. But my biggest one is, what is your like big hope for how your website is used? So, you have, at least for George Washington, you have so much information, and I'm curious, like, what is your kind of dream audience for that website? How do you want to see that? How do you want to see that kind of out in the world? Also,
Does Melba have a question?
Yeah, Melba really enjoyed the presentation.
Or
She said that she liked all of the baseballs at Babe Ruth's grave.
I'm sure. Good job, Melba. So I would again. So my main interest is the presidents and the vice presidents and their graves, but so that's where a lot of my initial focus is going to be on the biographical stuff. But again, I'd like it to be a tool for learning about people from all aspects of history. I guess so, civil rights activists. Criminals, murder victims, athletes. So that's why I tried to give a bit of a flavor of that in the presentation, because I want it to be a starting point for people. Basically, I want them to, maybe they have a little bit of an interest in a certain movement or a certain era of history, and maybe they can see that, oh, this is the person I'm interested in, or this movement I'm interested in, has places I can go to, or a grave that I can go to, maybe, or even if people are unable to travel to those places, maybe again just the list of sources at the bottom. Don't let me be the end all be all of of your historical learning. I want to get people out to the actual places, or help them find what I think are some reputable sources to continue their history learning that way. So I want it to be something instructional and fun and helpful.
That's wonderful. It's such a cool website. That's actually how I met you, was through your website. So, it's a great point for connection.
Yeah.
All right. So if anybody else has any questions, you can use the hand raise emoji and I'll unmute you. Or you can put the questions in the chat if you want to do it that way. All right. I see a question. All right. Okay. Tony, why don't you go ahead? Let me make sure that you're unmuted. Okay, you're good. You're unmuted. I think. Nope, you're not. I lied. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second.
I am.
Oh, there you go. All right, there you are.
So my question to you is, so when you were 8, why did you decide to look at gravestones? I mean, I know that you wanted to do it for the presidents, but kids at 8 are collecting baseball cards and football cards, and you decided to do that. Why did you pick that subject?
Well, normal is overrated. But so my first graves were the Adamses up in Quincy, Massachusetts, and that was my uncle and his girlfriend at the time took me and took my sister there. And we also went to the different Adams homes that are there in Quincy, the birthplaces and Peace Fields, the old house, and in all aspects, they were really coming alive for me, going through the rooms and then seeing the graves. And it was just like, oh, they're actually here. The people that I've been reading about, in my president books, since I've been interested in presidents, for a year, at that point, I first got into them when I was 7. It's like, here they are. And then we went on a family trip a month or so later to a Washington, D.C. area. And in Virginia, we visited the Kennedys and the Washingtons, and in addition to a lot of the other historic sites and monuments. And so I had a few presidents and first ladies in my pocket before I really took this on as a full-fledged hobby, which was inspired by Brian Lamb, the founder of C-SPAN, and Richard Norton Smith, presidential historian. My dad was channel surfing. A few months later was December 2003, and he came across a re-airing of a book talk, National Press Club book talk from 2000, about a book that C-SPAN had just put out, Who's Buried in Grant's Tomb, which was about the history of presidential grave sites, so their deaths, where they're buried, how to find them, whatnot. And then I didn't see the program at all, but my father then later told me, age 9 at that point, about that program and how Richard Norton Smith and Brian Lamb had visited all the presidential grave sites. And then he told me this, and then I looked up at him. I said, "Can we do that?" And then he said, "Do what?" And I said, "Visit every presidential grave site." And so that was it. So I was, even after visiting my first 4 presidents and first ladies, it wasn't really on my radar to, oh, I can visit them all. But then it was. So. And then it just snowballs from there, all different topics. So.
Yeah, that's great. I wish more kids were like that.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time. It's 7 o'clock now, so I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has anything. No? Okay.
I'm
well, No, Kurt, I just want to say thank you again. This was so cool. And I mean, I just feel honored that like North Burial Ground rates every once in a while, come visit us. And I just think Kurt's, if you're an Instagram person, and I know Kurt mentioned that a lot of folks on this chat already know him, but his Instagram is like a great follow too. It's very, very cool. And I feel like I've just learned so much since kind of this short acquaintance that we've had, and it's been really great. So thank you very much. And yeah, I hope to see you more times at NBG and come out and collect some folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for hosting me. And if anybody is interested in visiting graves and you're in the Rhode Island area, definitely go see Annalisa and some not living members of North Burial Ground there. So lots of interesting graves and histories of a wide variety of people. I think just like, again, different places across the country, North Burial Ground has something for everybody, I think.
Absolutely.
Well
All
done.
right. Yeah, Kurt, you've gotten a lot of really great comments. Bree says, "Thank you so much. Wow, a lot of excellent jobs. This was excellent. Great job, Kurt. Great talk." So the chat loves you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope to see you again at another NBG Presents presentation or coming out to North Burial Ground, like Kurt said, or coming out to North Burial Ground with Kurt, since you all seem to know Kurt, which is great. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. All right, good night.
Night.
Right. It was a good job.